Mohamed Bazoum came to power as president of Niger following his victory in the 2021 elections. He took over from Mahamadou Issoufou, who had completed 2 mandates and could not go in for a third, according to the country's constitution. Bazoum's journey to his country's top seat was considered an inspiration, from a syndicate actor through a rough political terrain to holding several state functions. The peaceful transfer of power between Mahamadou Issoufou and himself made him even more special, because it was the dawn of a new phase of democracy in the country. However, the expectations of building on the democratic foundations laid by Mahamadou Issoufou was cut short on July 26, 2023, barely 2 years into his presidency, when the military seized power from him through a coup. In today's edition, we are going in depth on the journey of Mohamed Bazoum as we explore his rise to the presidency, what went wrong for him, and whether the country has any hope to return to democracy at a time when the military seemed poised to hold on to power despite sanctions and even a military invasion threat from ECOWAS and France. His very long-time and close friend is here with us. We shall be talking to him in a moment. Stay with us. Like I said earlier, the guest on this edition of the program is a long-time close friend of the deposed Nigerian president, Mohamed Bazoum, a friendship which dates back as far as the 1990s. In this same period, this figure was one of the leading voices for a return to multi-party politics in Cameroon. As a student in the then University of Cameroon in Yaoundé, he created the Student Club of African Culture. In the year 1976, he then created the Pan-African Party, close to the UPC faithfuls, which would later metamorphose to a movement known as Cap Liberté. Later, this also transformed into a political party known as the Movement for Democracy and Independence. He would then leave the country and establish in South Africa, from where he continued to promote Pan-African ideals across the continent, meeting several political figures. Since his return to Cameroon, he has decided to put his experience to promote political education amongst the masses. The senior information and communication technology expert and entrepreneur is author of many books, amongst them one on his longtime close friend, Mohamed Bazoum. It is titled Mohamed Bazoum, Chemin de la Présidence, to be translated in English as The Road to the Presidency. It is with him that we shall look at the life of the now deposed Nigerian president and what lies in store for the country. Joachim Chameni, thank you very much for talking to us. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Peter, for having me.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, your friendship with Mohamed Bazoum dates back as far as 1990s. When you heard that the military overtook power and deposed him, what was going on through your mind? How did you receive the information?
Well, the first thing that went through my mind was a concern about his safety. Being a president is a dangerous job, and then you can be killed at any time. I know Bazoum, like you said, since 1991. So that's been 32 years, and then I know his wife, I know his children, so I was concerned first about their safety. Once I found out that they were safe, then, I just went back into my political mode and then tried to understand what was happening.
What's happening?
Yes.
All right. You met him in 1991 during the Niger Congress. That's the National Congress of the party of the country. At the time when the country was deep into military rule and there was that fight for democracy. What sparked the friendship between you and Mohamed Bazoum?
I went to Niger in 1991 to seek, in a tour that was meant to learn from countries, other African countries, how they obtained a national conference and then how they were running it. You know that in Cameroon, we were also fighting.
Yeah, with the tripartite
in 1991, we wanted the national conference. We ended up having the tripartite. That was not actually a sovereign national conference, but I had gone there to Niger to attend their own national conference that was actually sovereign. And then that's when I met Bazoum. That's where I met him. And then, you know, I saw in him a young, because at the time we were about the same age, more or less. He's maybe 1 year older than me, that's all. So I saw in him a then young revolutionary, head of the National Workers' Trade Union of Niger at the time, and then a person that was also a very good politician. I saw how he was controlling actually the national conference and then being impactful in the outcome of this.
All right, now what will you say was the difference between what you saw in Niger and what was during the tripartite conference here in Cameroon?
Well, the difference between the national conference of Niger and that of the tripartite in Cameroon was that the national conference of Niger was sovereign. It meant clearly that all the power of the president, all the executive power, legislative power, maybe not the judiciary, but were transferred to the national conference. And then the national conference there, so therefore the president remained as a figurehead with no power at all.
Yeah.
And then the national conference was tasked with appointing a prime minister, and then give to that prime minister a transitional period to carry out all the decisions of the national conference, which meant a new constitution, the new electoral code, so on and so forth. So that's the fundamental difference. What happened here is, with the tripartite agreement in Cameroon, is that Mr. Biya kept all his powers, and then it was a discussion, you know,
like a top-bottom approach.
Yeah, we just made the discussion, made some recommendation that he could agree to or disagree to. So that was the fundamental difference.
All right, let's go back to Mohamed Bazoum. Like I mentioned earlier, you wrote a book, Mohamed Bazoum, Chemin de la Présidence in French, that's Road to the Presidency in English. Away from Mohamed Bazoum as a politician, as president of Niger, how would you describe him as a person?
Bazoum, that I have known before he became president, it's a bit different from the one that became president. Of course, the presidential function is a very difficult one, and then he has this ability to change people. However, as a person, Bazoum was, in my eyes, and then everything that he showed to me throughout the time we've known each other, it was an authentic revolutionary. He was a person that had, he went to the University of Cheikh Anta Diop of Senegal. And then that place was almost like a mecca of progressive African thinkers at the time. And then, you know, so had clearly, first of all, he studied philosophy, and then he was, received a good revolutionary training, Marxist, Leninist type of training, which made him quite ready to become what he ended up becoming. As soon as he came back to Niger, as a professor of philosophy, he became a trade unionist, headed the trade union of teachers, and then moved on to head the trade union of all workers of Niger. So that was a leftist-minded person that was genuinely seeking the betterment of the masses of Niger. Yes.
Okay, let's look at the trade union phase of Mohamed Bazoum. Like you mentioned, he studied in Senegal, came back to the country as a lecturer, headed the teachers' trade union and then the workers' trade union. How did that particular phase of trade unionism, what they'll call in French syndicate activism, shape him for the political future that he had?
When you are a trade unionist and that has a good political training, you are able to conduct a political fight with a long-term vision, and then at each time make the grassroots, to move.
Yeah, to move.
Yes. And so having such trade unionists in Niger made it possible for them to obtain what we could not obtain here. Because in Niger, they had a military government at the time. And then they were able to mobilize the grassroots and then force the president
to make concessions.
To call that national conference. And then they were very skillful in doing that, indeed.
Okay, now let's go back to the National Congress, which you said gave a new impetus to the country's political evolution. What was the contribution of Mohamed Bazoum at the time to make it successful?
Well, I have to say this, is that he was at the same time the head of the trade union, but at the same time the number 2 of a political party that they created a year earlier with Mahamadou Issoufou, called Parti Nigérien pour la démocratie et le socialisme. Okay. So in English,
Nigerian Party for Democracy and Socialism.
Socialism. So clearly stating what the goal were. Also, that one, we want to democratize the society. Second, we want to fight for the downtrodden, for the workers, for the peasants, and so on and so forth. So it was clearly a socialist, anti-imperialist. The manifesto of the party was very, very clear, and then that's why we actually became friends, because everything they stood for, which is true democracy, end to neocolonialism for one, true democracy, and then a system that takes care of the vast majority of people rather than just taking care of a minority of wealthy folks. That's what really got us together. And as a politician, the PNDS, his party, understood that Bazoum and his party, of course, understood that they had to go through steps. The first step was to shaken the basis of the neocolonial system that was put there by France. And then they did that step and then move on to join the national unity government. Because when you have a national conference, it's almost like you start on a clean slate.
Yes.
You define a new constitution, then appoint a prime minister, and then that prime minister appoints a government of national unity. And a transitional government of national unity that has about 2 to 3 years to reshape the political dispensation. And they did that, and then they were skillful enough to join that government. But as time was going by, when they found out that they were a minority inside the government, they resigned, fought again. There was a coup. Actually, there was about 2 coups. And then each time after the coup, there was like a transitional period. What struck me is that each time they managed to always be in the government that came after the coup. And I even later on found out that sometimes they were even part of the plotters of the coup. At least in one instance, they were. Because there are 2 types of coups, I have to say this. You have the coup that are inspired by popular revolt. That these people rise up, and then the military takes power.
Takes the action.
Yes. The decisive action at the end, that these people are already mobilized. So that is different from a coup where the military themselves move without the people. And then later on, they might or might not have people's support.
Okay, now, when you look at the strategy of the party, as someone who has progressively observed politics along Africa. How did that affect the relationship between the PD, the PNDS and the population that were seeking for change at the time?
Okay, I have to say this. Let me just go back to why I even wrote the book in the first place. The book was called, indeed, Mohamed Bazoum Road to Presidency. But if you read the book, it wasn't like a praise
like
song,
a special focus,
a praise song, yes, of Bazoum. That was not what I wanted to bring to the fore. In the book, I was trying to show to parties or left-leaning activists that here's the case of an organization that was formed in 1990 and then that skillfully rose to power after 20 years of struggle.
In a very difficult context for that.
In a context that was extremely difficult, made of series of coups and president assassinations and things of that nature. And then the lesson that I drew from PNDS path, which is Mohamed Bazoum path, because he's been the number 2 of that party until he became the number 1 at the end, after Mohamed Issoufou, that they were teaching us a lesson of patience, resilience, good strategic thinking, which is not the case for most political parties, and particularly in Cameroon, where they create the political parties today, and then the next day they want to become president. And then, of course, they end up failing, because strategy means long-term vision, and then the ability to plan, mobilize resources, and then be resilient in the long run. So that's why I wrote the book. And, so in that book, you see the lessons that can be learned, and then how they were able to keep always on the side of the people until, indeed, peacefully they took over in 2011.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, now, how did the friendship between, or that collaboration between Mohamed Bazoum and former President Issoufou worked in their favor to get to the presidency in 2011?
Well, the fact that the two of them created the party and then kept the relationship among each other that I could compare to the relationship between, say, Che Guevara and Castro.
And Castro.
Yes. When you create a revolutionary movement and then you are able to keep a stable pool of leaders and that trust each other and then that remain faithful to each other, you are more likely to succeed than if you have internal strife and then, division among the leadership of that organization. So it played a fundamental role, not only to allow them to take the power after 20 years of struggle, but to be able to hand over, after 10 years after Mohamed Issoufou, because actually Mohamed Issoufou handed the power over to him.
Okay.
So the same party that remained in power.
Okay, now, looking at the time in the 1990s when the party was active in Niger, did you at any time foresee them winning the presidency?
The path to presidency is a long one. At first, they went through several periods. Like a period of activism. Yeah. They did that. But like I said, very quickly kind of joined the government. Issoufou didn't do that at first. Bazoum was the one that he sent. Bazoum was, started as a Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs in the National Unity Government of 1991, I believe. And then later on, he kept participating in the government. And then Issoufou stepped in also, and then eventually became Prime Minister at one point, Minister, then Prime Minister, then head of the National Assembly. So you see, they carefully kind of went through all the different steps. I remember when I actually saw Issoufou preparing himself to become president. That was in Ouagadougou. And then he told me, you know, Jokam, now I am ready. I think that we are on the last straight path to this thing. And then we have to make some compromise. And then I just told him, I hope that in you making the necessary compromise to be in power, that you not make compromission, because there is a difference between compromise and then compromission.
Okay, now let's talk about that peaceful handover of power, which you said between Mahamadou Issoufou and Mohamed Bazoum in 2021. How significant was it for Niger, a country where the people have experienced so much military coup, and then they had 10 years of a presidential mandate that's 5 years each, and then later there was a peaceful handover without any problems, even though there was a coup 2 days before the handover.
Yes, but let me just say this, is that the first is that peaceful handover from a civilian president to another civilian president was something that had never been seen in Niger before. So it was celebrated not only in Niger, but all over the world. Everybody was happy. Everybody was very happy and proud of Mohamed Issoufou, that unlike most presidents, including the very good friends of France like Ouattara and all others, he did not even attempt to have a third term. And so he was praised for that. And there was a lot of hope that was put on not only Mohamed Bazoum as a person, but the Nigerian democracy as a whole, because then you've seen, you know, he appeared to have had a clear popular mandate. But things were not as nice as they appear. And the proof is that even before he took over, there was a coup attempt.
Yes.
So that was a sign. Yes. That was forward, and then that was a sign that you know, that this nice golden cover was hiding things that were not as pretty.
Now, concretely speaking, what did you think went negative for Mohamed Bazoum during his 2-year presidency that could have made this coup possible as it was?
It is difficult to understand the 2 years of Mohamed Bazoum if you don't look into the 10 years of
Mahamadou
Issoufou. Because you have to understand it's the same party that was in power. It's the same regime that took power in 2011 and then went on into 2021 and then hand over to Bazoum. So PNDS has been in power for 12 years. So it's the same regime,
yes.
You know, that was in power. It's almost like, I don't know, Paul Biya handing over to Ataganji. And then the CBDM remains there. So it's just something like that. What happened during the reign of Mohamadou Issoufou was that the hopes of leftist policies never really materialized. They took over, and then after a few years, it appeared that they were doing...
They drifted from the original philosophy that they had set.
The world, I wouldn't say they drifted from philosophy, because they kept talking the same talk. But their action didn't seem to follow
what they were saying.
What they were preaching, that's right. And each time, of course, I approached them, and they were responding to me that power is complicated, and that you have to always adjust, that's right, to it. And then I do remember Mohamed Bazoum telling me that, look, Jukam, I've never felt as powerless as I feel since I am in power. He told me that. And then he went on to explain to me the type of pressure he was under from France and Western powers at the time trying to attack Libya.
Yes.
They wanted them. They wanted them to give him away.
Yeah, to
attack Libya from Niger, and it was like, I can't do it. Gaddafi helped us. You know what Gaddafi has done to the PNDS and to help us get in power. I cannot do this. But I can tell you one thing is that when I say no on one thing, I'll have to pay by two other things that they will ask for. That the type of pressure we are under as president is extraordinary. Now, I showed understanding for that, and then hoping that as they remain in power, they will be able to acquire experience to be able to kind of go around. Because for me, they kept the good intention. They just had to deal with the reality of power. And then that's why you have to make compromise. A compromise is what? It is taking into account reality without foregoing your goal. You know, so you might want to go, say, to I don't know, you might want to go to Limbe, and then but when you get to the bridge, the bridge is blocked. You want to go with your own car, right? And then the bridge is blocked, and then somebody come to you and then say, oh, the bridge is blocked, give up your other trip to Limbe, something like that. And then if you give up, that's a compromission.
Yes.
But you can decide, hey, I may not be able to cross this bridge with my car. I will get onto a motorbike and then rent a car on the other side in Bonaberi, and then keep getting to Limbe. That's a compromise. And then that's, you know, so, but now it might be easy, you know, sitting down, looking there to have this thinking right away that, okay, I don't have a car, therefore I could pick up a bike, or I can just cross by foot and then get the car on the other side. But what happened is that if the president keeps that line, he keeps his option, ideological option, with time, he gets experience, and then he can deal with the various pressures.
Yeah, with those pressures.
That's right. But if you somewhere down the line start losing your convictions, letting the people tell you that no, what you're dreaming of for the people is not something doable, and then you have to be real, just keep in power first. Then you start drifting apart from your original ideas. Now, my hope always was that PNDS as an organization will get experience in finding the right compromise that will allow them to stay in power, because once you're in power, your first goal is to remain there.
Yes, to remain there.
And then you don't remain there because you love power necessarily. You remain there because that's the only way for you to realize your goal. But now, I was hoping that as they stay in power, they will learn how to ward off some of those negative influences and stuff like that. And then I was more hopeful when Bazoum took over, because I knew the two of them, and then I knew Bazoum was more intransigent as a revolutionary than Mohamed Bazoum was. And then I was also thinking that maybe Mohamed Bazoum would do the dirty work of maintaining them in power, and then Bazoum would now take up this thing and
move ahead.
Yes, and move ahead. But things did not happen that way, clearly. It did not happen that way. That's why, indeed, he didn't stay in power.
But now, I'm there to ask this question. Why is the military prone to doing coups in Niger?
Well, maybe it's a larger question. Why are military
Coups in Africa.
coups? You know,
In Africa.
in Africa, generally speaking,
Yeah.
and in some other places too. They are military step in when usually the civilian dispensation is in crisis. And those crises can be created by various factors, external as well as internal. It could be that the faction, because every time there is a ruling class, that ruling class is divided in factions. And then those factions, they be sometimes conflicting, having conflict among each other. And when those conflicts run out of hand, the civilian power loses a form of legitimacy, and then the sole organized force in the country is the army. They step in, and then they take over, and then each time they take over, they say it's because things were bad, and then we have to maintain order in the country. And, you know, so that's usually that's the general context. Whether it's genuine or not, whether they take over because they actually want to fix the thing, or they use the crisis as an excuse to take over, but that's generally the context. Now, what is happening specifically in Niger or generally in the Sahelian region? This succession of coups are linked to the general political, social, and political crisis, but also to security issues that they have with the so-called terrorists that are all over the place since the fall of Gaddafi. And then that are really creating serious challenges to most government. And most of the civilian government have proven unable to actually conduct a response toward them. And then so militaries that take over, well, at least in the case of Mali and Burkina Faso, the excuse is the president is not managing the war properly. But in Guinea, it's something else. Okay, there the president tried to get a third term. He created a social political crisis. The military stepped in and then put him aside. But that's what is happening, at least in these three countries, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. It is mainly triggered by the security challenges that they face.
Now, since this crisis broke out, there's been one country that has been making news, France. What is the role of France in all of this setup?
Oh, highly negative. And in fact, France has had the policy of starting the fire and then coming in as a firefighter. What they call in French, pompier pyromane.
Pompier pyromane.
You know that most of the security issues in the Sahelian region actually was after the fall of Gaddafi.
Yes.
And France has always come along and then said, okay, yes, we are going to help. And then they had Barkhane, they had Sabre, they had all sorts of military operation. But they are there. They have military bases. They have drones. They're not the only one there. Americans are there too.
The Americans are there.
The Germans are in there too.
The Italians as well.
And then they all of them are there, but somehow they don't see the terrorists. And those terrorists are occupying, like in the case of Burkina Faso, about 40% of the country. And then in Mali, at one point, it was even 60% of the country.
Yeah, for
you know, so why? So it begs the question, and several questions, in fact. How come these people that can see you in your backyard are unable to see these terrorists, unable to fight them, unable to finish them off? And it turns out that there's a lot of suspicion from the armies of the different countries that France is actually, if they're not the initiator, they're the supporters of those terrorists. And in the case of Niger, one thing that the General Chani used to rally all the military among them was the fact that when they were arresting terrorists, the presidency was Bazoum in this instance was asking for them to be released under the pressure of France. And some other time when they were about to attack them, they will receive orders from the presidency to stop.
To stop and retreat.
To stop and retreat. That we have to wait for France to give the okay. And of course, that did not please the army because they were dying. You know, I mean, you have a group of people that kill a whole bunch of your comrades, and then when you're about to round them up, then the president tells you, retreat, retreat, stop the operation, and things of that nature. Now, I'm saying that that's what they say. I'm not saying that this is necessarily true.
Yeah, it's necessarily true.
Yes, but that was definitely some of the talk going on around. And then it's been going on around for quite a long time. Not only the people of Niger, generally speaking, but some segment of the army felt that Mohamed Bazoum and Bazoum after him were really too close to France, and they were just listening to them too much. And to my surprise, indeed, to my surprise, because these are people that I hope would free Niger from the grips of France.
Okay, now, looking at that hypothesis that you have built, could this have explained why the army finally accepted the coup of General Chani? Because when Bazoum was detained, the army, first of all, want the coup plotters that want to release the president and reinstate him. But later on, the chief of the defense staff, General Modi, came in and supported General Chani.
That's right.
Could that have been one of the issues that must have pushed the army now to back the head of the presidential guard?
Absolutely. Yes, in fact, there's a lot of things that goes on. I mean, there's a lot of talk, of course, going on from several quarters. One says that because Modi was dismissed by Bazoum, and he was an army chief of staff, he was dismissed, and then he was apparently about to dismiss Chani also. So, so some people say, well, these people made the coup, these two made this coup to reinstate themselves. But that cannot explain why all the other military joined them. So clearly, there must have been some mistakes that were made by Bazoum in the management of the war that got all his military against him. And then my contacts within the army, that's what they say. They say that he was freeing terrorists, he was stopping them from attacking them, whereas terrorists could kill a whole bunch of them and stuff like that, so, yeah.
Okay, now, since the coup has been almost 2 weeks now, the military has remained adamant to release General Bazoum or reinstate him, despite the threat from ECOWAS and the sanctions that are in place. What do you make of the junta position? What are they trying to showcase at this point in time?
Well, when you go in for a coup, usually it's a life-threatening decision that you take for yourself.
It's treason.
Either you succeed.
Yeah, going by the constitution is treason.
Exactly. Yeah. Either you succeed or you have a a long jail sentence, yeah. or you might even be killed in the process. So they have no other choice but to remain on their position and then try to negotiate from there. And then they have, I would say, quite a good position in the sense that there is, one, no division within all the armed forces of the country. Two, there's no people coming out in masses asking for the reinstatement of Bazoum. President. You know, so really now it is actually ECOWAS that is embarrassed because they have put in sanctions that violate the text of ECOWAS, and now they're talking about military intervention, which they cannot do without the accord of the African Union, and then the Security Council. That's what the text of ECOWAS says. Yes. You know, so there is something to notice indeed in that situation in Niger, is that the people seem to be supporting the coup. They came up in droves, and the other thing that amazes me is that the PNDS seem to have completely disappeared.
Exactly. I was really about to ask that question because Bazoum's political party seem not to be making very little action about it, and even the other opposition parties in the country. What explains this silence from the political forces of Niger at this point in time? Well,
you know, someone asked me, did you see this coming? And then I respond, yes. About a year ago, I knew that Bazoum will have either a difficult presidency or it might be overthrown. Yes. What made me think so is that first, generally speaking, he did not, you know, when you inherit of something in politics, you have to be cold-hearted. You take the assets and then you refuse the liability.
Yes.
And Bazoum seemed not able to get the assets of Mamadou Issoufou, nor to get rid of his liabilities. In fact, he carried the liabilities and then he moved on with it. And what was the liability of Mamadou Issoufou reign? He corrupted trade unions and then the civil society organizations. So I mean, he didn't corrupt them first, he suppressed them.
Yeah.
Which was kind of surprising from
being that they are trade union leaders themselves.
That's right. They suppressed the civil society. And Bazoum was at one point the Minister of Interior, and then he was just as bad as Atangani, you know, in terms of being like, okay, I don't want nobody to, no manifestation, no nothing, so on and so forth. So, and then the elements that were not suppressed were eventually corrupted. So that has silenced the society. When Bazoum took over, he went on and started talking to them, but it was too little, too late.
Too late.
Yes. And then you have, on the other hand, the fact that the condition of the people wasn't getting any better. And then you have, to add to that, the perception that France was have overbearing influence over him
on the country,
to the point that Bazoum went on television and started attacking the neighbors. Once he did that, I knew that was the end for him.
You mean the coup in Mali and Burkina Faso?
Yes, when he started attacking Mali and then Burkina Faso leaders, and then failed to do the same for the president of Chad. That was put on by the French.
Who are all members of the G5 Sahel.
That's right. You know, so you can be using that. You can be, you know, just supporting coup in Chad and then, you know, just fighting against it in Mali and then in Burkina Faso. So it didn't make sense. It looked like you were just a little French stooge because the French, they put the Bébé Maréchal in power in Chad. So now you support him. And then when it comes to Goita and then Traoré, then you become democratic. Then, you know, stuff like that. They are military, you know. So all of that made it you know, uneasy, and made me see that sooner or later he will run into trouble, not only within his own army. Because if you lean too much on France, and then it's France that's financing the terrorists, then the army, you get at odds with the army. Because they'll be killing the soldiers, and then the soldiers have no...
Yeah, soldiers as well will get up and say they want it to stop.
That's right. And then on the other hand, now you're attacking the neighbors. It means that any coup leader can easily get support from them. Because those countries are linked. It's the same people. You know, Mali, Burkina Faso, the same people. You know, so at least at the frontier there, you have also you have Mega in Mali, you have Mega in Niger. I mean, it's the same people. You know, so you have to be very, very careful. I don't know why he went to that extent. I advised him against it, but he kept doing it.
Okay, now, ECOWAS is meeting today in Abuja for the second time about the crisis in Niger. The first time they met, they announced a series of sanctions which are ongoing. Barely yesterday, the Central Bank of Nigeria went in with the financial sanctions. There was that military threat, which to many observers, it's not a very good option. Now, what do you look at the stand of ECOWAS in this crisis? How have they handled it? Do you think they have been clumsy, or they are just respecting the agreements that they themselves decided?
No, as I said earlier, everything ECOWAS is doing right now doesn't make any sense at all. You know, condemning the coup is the position in principle that everybody must take. You know, power should normally be gained through a popular support, and then hopefully through elections. Yes. Right. And then there is no evidence that Tiani has any mandate from the people of Niger. So that's clear. But now, the action of ECOWAS is strange, to say the least. In terms of the severity of the sanctions, that will in no way affect neither Bazoum nor Chani in any manner. The people that will bear the consequences will be the poor people of Niger that are already under a lot of hardship. Second, thinking even 1 second about the military option makes no sense when you look at the fact that the coup happened without one drop of blood being, you know, on the floor, nor repression of the population. You know, even in Libya, when France and the US decided to overthrow Gaddafi, they created some form of revolution.
There was a revolution led by the son of Gaddafi.
As the government tried to fight against the so-called revolutionary, then they stepped in to say, oh, he's trying to kill civilians. Yes. But Chani hasn't killed no one. No one is rising up against Chani. You cannot, in that context, find even one moral reason why military force should move in. My advice is that ECOWAS, the president of Nigeria first must stop talking things that he knows he can do. I don't think that Nigeria is militarily ready to go and attack anybody because they haven't been able to defeat Boko Haram in Nigeria. Second, the president of Nigeria himself, is in shaky ground. His election is still contested. And then third, it simply doesn't make any sense. What they need to do is to use the way of diplomacy and negotiation. That's what needs to happen at this particular point, because there is no danger, nobody's dead, stuff like that. But they can, and then they must lift those sanctions because they make no sense. They violate even ECOWAS text. The last thing I want to say is this, is that you have 4 countries already in ECOWAS, or let's say 3, that say we will not respect this. So ECOWAS is already broken. So I think that they should be wise and think of first the best interest of the people of Niger. That's what they must be thinking about first, before anything. Not functioning like a trade union of head of states and one of us was removed, therefore we must do this and then do that. First of all, what is the stance of the people? That's number one. And then second, how can we best bring back constitutional order through a negotiation, not through violence? Okay.
You just mentioned Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and I would like also to talk a little bit about him. How will the tenor of this crisis affect him as president of Nigeria? We know that presently, as we speak, he is still awaiting the confirmation of his nominees of ministers. You mentioned earlier that the election is still being contested. It's still in court, and also the Nigerian defense that is already overstretched with so many hotspots within Nigeria
itself. That's right.
How would this affect Bola Ahmed Tinubu, looking at the fact that he went ahead to cut electricity, he has shut the borders and imposed financial sanctions on Niger?
I think you will eventually back down from all this thing, because they looked to me like it was just an emotional decision making, surely under the pressure of France. People do not know this, but France has more economic interest in Nigeria than they have in Cameroon. And then clearly, I mean, come on, Nigeria is bigger in size and then have more money than all the French-speaking countries together. There's more population, more money than all of them. So France is over there. And then France bears quite a lot of influence in Nigerian politics and controls ECOWAS. I can tell you that much. They have this way of controlling those African regional institutions, including even the AU. They pay the salaries of people. They pay section of the finances. I mean, in such a way that they have so much influence on those guys that it's not even acceptable. So the president of Nigeria will go back. I mean, before I came here, I was listening to the news. They're meeting, I think, maybe in Abuja today.
Yeah, they are meeting.
Today. And then already, that hard line is, just softening down. They have no choice. They cannot do it. I mean, Nigeria can back, but they can't bite.
Okay, now, how do you foresee the developments henceforth in Niger?
I do not see Bazoum coming back because even if he came back, it would be a lame duck. The people, in Turkey, the US attempted a coup there. Used some elements in the army and in other sector of society to overthrow Erdogan. People rose up, and then the coup failed. Erdogan is in power, maybe a little bit weakened, but he can say, my people put me back. They came out in droves when I was, during the coup attempt, to support me. That has not happened in Niger. the first day, a group of people went toward the presidency. They just shot in the air, and then they dispersed, and then they didn't do it. You know, so that's for one. The second thing is that Bazoum himself never called on the people of Niger to defend the president-elect. What he did instead, when he had the chance, was to call on the US and in France to help reinstate him. That was, for me, really the point of departure. Politically speaking, of course, I'm not talking humanly speaking. Yeah. Humanly speaking, he's my friend. I mean, I have to call him. But politically speaking, I thought that was the greatest blunder. And I was ashamed that day when I heard him say that, because my advice to him is rather resign than agree for any foreign force to come in this country. If he does that, he will go down in history as a puppet and then as a highly irresponsible individual. And then I don't wish that for him. Now he's holding on, and then he should hold on. He was elected some kind of way. The negotiation must continue, but I do not see, when I look at the relationship of forces at this particular point, internally and then regionally, there will be more likely a transitional period. China may not be the head of the transitional period. They may force a civilian president to be in a transitional period, but that's just what it's going to be.
But already, how would that happen? Because he just appointed a prime minister, and there's already a cabinet made up of about 6 soldiers within that cabinet, 21-man cabinet.
Yes.
Do you think ECOWAS still has the leverage to force China now to go into a transition, probably with a calendar that could?
Well, that's the thing. When you have such things happening, the only way out is to turn the thing into a transition. And then when you have a transition, either the coup leader is strong enough to remain president during the transition,
like Goita.
Like Goita, yeah. And all the rest. But you know that Goita they took over the power, but the international community somehow forced them to have a civilian president.
Yeah, president.
Then he did the second coup and then removed him. In Niger, it may happen the other way around. It might happen. That's one possible scenario where, okay, Bazoum, they get him to resign. Then they appoint
a civilian president.
A civilian president
to lead the transition.
To do the transition, yes. It could be, that's one possible scenario. That's probably even the best thing that could possibly happen. Yeah.
All right, this last question before we go. What will you expect the Nigerian people to do? As someone who has always preached about the need for political education, what do you expect from the people of Niger? Because at the end of the day, they are the ones to suffer or enjoy any action that will emerge from this particular crisis.
Yeah, I'd wish that we talk more about them rather than talk about those heads of states, yes. But because that's where my heart is. I think that the people of Niger have expressed clearly that they want sovereignty from France, that they are anti-imperialist, and that they really want peace to reign in their country. So they cleared, the message of the people is clear in that regard. Yeah. And then I fully support the people in that. Because as soon as I, like I said, when I heard that Bazoum was overthrown, I was concerned about his safety. When his physical integrity was not touched, then I moved on, and then I expressed my support for the people of Niger because they came out and understood that this coup could be an occasion for them to move Niger out of the grip of France. Yeah. And then that's what they should do. I support the general movement of the people in the Sahel region for sovereignty, African unity, anti-imperialism.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jokam Chameni.
You're welcome.
Just to remind televiewers that you are a Pan-Africanist and very
Yes,
close friend, a longtime friend of President Mohamed Bazoum, who has been deposed out there in Niger. Thank you very much for sharing your take on the crisis.
Thank you, Peter, for having me.
All right.
Always a pleasure to be here.
And to you, televiewers, thank you very much for being with us. It was a pleasure being with you in this edition of the program In Depth. Until next time, when we go in depth on another issue, it's bye for now.